Hi guys, this is Cy from Cyanide Software. This is our getting started video for our Cyanide Disperse. Disperse is our painting plugin in 3D Studio Max. So first thing that you need to do is create a disperse, and that can be found, go to the Create down to Geometry in the command panel. Under the rollout, you're going to scroll down to Cyanide Software, and you'll find our 4 object plugins here. So we will create a disperse. Now, first thing to get going, let's just open up this so you can see all the menus. We'll talk about every sort of thing briefly here. The first thing that you're going to want to do as soon as you create a disperse is add objects into your painter. So you can do that 2 ways. You can use the add by name dialog, which will open up the pick dialog. Or you can just simply press add objects by picker. And that's this little box here. And as you're going along, you can simply just select objects one by one, and it throws them right into our Disperse plugin. Now, a quick overview of all our rollouts here. We have a stats rollout, which will basically tell you how many objects you've painted, how many polys there are in the scene, and whether you're using acceleration, which means that we have worked with the renderer to make rendering faster and more memory efficient. Next, you'll see our display window, so you can display our objects or your painted objects in multiple different formats, whether it's dot, bounding box, pyramid, or the original mesh. Pyramid is going to be the mode that you're going to want to use to paint very complex things in your scene, but still keep it very light. Then you have an update all, so if you update any of these textures or whatnot on your objects or update any of the meshes, you're going to want to run an update all. And if you want to save select this out, you can simply just press select all and it'll select what objects you have in there plus the disperse. Down to our painting menu. Now we have a couple of brushes. We have paint single object, we have paint multiple objects, we have an erase, and a replace button. The replace button is grayed out until you select an object or multiple objects to replace. And you use that picker by simply just selecting a single object in your scene, and it'll go replace those with a disperse. Our painting object has a single painting brush, which paints directional painting, and as soon as you're done painting, and lift off your brush stroke, it turns it into its single mesh. We have a multiple painter, so to paint multiple objects. That also has collision distance and the amount of painting and fall off. And we have an erase brush. So the erase brush will erase everything that you have selected. Also, if you have nothing selected, it'll erase everything. But if you have a single object selected, it'll just erase that type of single object. Same thing with all the painters. If you have nothing selected, it'll paint everything in your list. If you have 1 object or 2 objects selected, it's just going to paint what you have selected. Next is our distributed objects rollout. That you saw this. This is where we added our objects. So this is also where all the transformations are kept. So we have an all object transformation, and then we have an additional transformation for individual objects. So you can go and turn on random transform, and I can randomly transform the scale of my objects, but then when I come into the individual objects, I also have that as a scale as well. So there's actually 2 transforms. The next tab is our color texture variation. This is where you're able to add a hue, saturation, brightness, or contrast to your diffuse color or your textures that are on your objects. There is also a naming feature, filtering system, so you could filter out certain textures that you didn't want to use color shift on. We have exclusion splines, which will work with animated splines, so you can have you can have objects disappearing by the color of the spline. We have camera clipping, so this is enabled stuff to not build stuff that's not in your camera view. That also includes expansion, so you're actually getting the shadows of objects that are just slightly out of your camera view. And then last we have our export geometry. So you can export geometry in many different ways. You can export as a multi-mesh, or you can export as single objects. Then you can also say, I want to do all the objects, or you can just simply pick a single object to export out. So if I pick my single object and I said export as single objects, it's going to take those with their new transformations on, and their new, if you're using texture variation, we'll add that texture variation to these and export them out for you. So that's basically our getting started and where everything is in our Disperse video. It's a very easy tool to use. I would encourage you to go to the more advanced videos on each section to see in more detail of how you use our Disperse. Thanks a lot, guys.